Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our February webinar, Plan More Effectively and Deliver Results. My name's Alexis Potterworney, and I'm a marketing associate here at ALM Works. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Today's agenda will be providing an introduction of the webinar. Our presenter, Jeremy Stark, will get into his presentation, and we will end the webinar with a Q&A session. Here are some housekeeping to be aware of. All attendee microphones are muted. So if you have any background noise in the background, no one will be able to hear it. Also, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. Questions will be answered after the prepared discussion. Also, to be aware of, this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending out an email to everyone with the webinar recording, and it will also be published on our YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, here's today's speaker, Jeremy Stark.
Hi, this is Jeremy Stark. I'm the head of solutions at ALM Works. I joined ALM Works about a year ago now, and I come from an engineering background and an Agile coaching background. And as I transitioned into Agile coaching, I started working with organizations on converting their teams over to Agile and working with management on what that meant in terms of planning, and then up towards the portfolio at the leadership level, what that meant for setting long-term goals when teams are working in short-term iterations. Hold on, sorry, I'm a little lost there. So we're going to talk about when I was working with these companies, I worked extensively with the ALM Works structure product, and I found that it worked really well to bring together the data from multiple teams working on larger projects that might have 500, 1,000 or more tickets and require several months worth of work to actually deliver the product that we're going to send to market. What I found there was a gap in is in reporting up to the leadership level the status of any of these projects that we're working on, which from leadership's perspective, we might be working on 4 or 5 things per quarter, which would be the quarterly roadmap that they are focused on. So coming to ALM Works, I've been working with them on developing really a product that sits above structure and organizes the structures that organizations use to track their projects, and provides some workflow and tools for basically curating status and metrics up to leadership. So the product that we've put together, we're calling it Deliver for Jira. It's a portfolio level product. It's in early stages of development. So I'm gonna go through some of the state that we're at with Deliver. Some of the things are working and implemented, and I'll demo some of that at the end. And then other pieces will come together at sometime around Summit for a demo at our booth, and then we'll transition to an early access program for Deliver post-Summit. And we're looking to release this product in the Jira Marketplace summer 2020. So working with these organizations, I kept hitting sort of this divide within the organization where we've got teams that are coming together around Agile principles, and leadership way up the chain, thinking in terms of quarters or even annual, in some cases, goals. And this creates some tension around planning where leadership is thinking in terms of quarterly goals and budgets, and the Agile teams are executing requirements and grooming requirements just in time. Leadership is thinking in terms of big bang releases, and the Agile teams are focused on their short delivery iterations. The leadership will generally show up with competitive table stakes. They understand the market, they understand the competition, they have a list of things that need to get done before we can put a product in the market. And then we also need to add our innovative additions to that list. And it comes up, it generates a rather large project that can't ship until all of these parts are in place. And the Agile teams have the philosophy they want to learn and pivot. So leadership has this product end state focus, and the Agile teams had this focus really just on the next few tickets that they're going to fill into the sprint, and then they're going to go into a retrospective and review and maybe make some adjustments. So coming from the Agile world, I struggled with the leadership planning and sort of hit this insight where it's really, the way leadership thinks is actually there are definitely things out in the market that will force you to think long-term and in terms of dates and in terms of large feature sets. And that's okay. And from an execution standpoint, Agile definitely has a lot of advantages. So bringing these two together became sort of my focus, rather than trying to dissolve leadership into the Agile process. So just to sort of simplify this, I think waterfall at the leadership level, there are some advantages to planning. There's a lot that goes into thinking about putting a large product into the market. So you might say the waterfall side has an advantage with planning, but definitely history has shown that execution in waterfall fails time and again to deliver on time and with the quality that we need in order to ship. And Agile certainly has proven that it can execute, but being able to give leadership information on long-term planning, it hasn't done, it's struggled. So there's this conflict. So the way that I started thinking about planning is to think of the organization in 3 layers, where we've got different timeframes for each layer. We had staff thinking basically in terms of days, and their processes are built around days and up to weeks with daily stand-ups and sprint iterations. Management's generally thinking in terms of weeks. They've got typically a weekly meeting that they have where they report up about the status of the various projects that they're involved in. And then leadership is thinking in terms of quarters and larger budgets and larger end results. So from ALM Works perspective, I saw that the staff had most of their issues resolved just with Jira boards. They're very effective tools for daily and weekly planning and planning your sprints. Management had very good success with structure, bringing all of this data together across all the teams contributing to a project. Structure brings all that data together wonderfully, provides all kinds of tools for doing the analysis. But curation to leadership was lacking. And there were some custom tools that I would develop or products on the marketplace that I would download, but this problem didn't seem to really be solved. And the primary question that leadership would ask is, when is it going to be done? Which, if you expand that out, is really the question that I sort of have built Deliver around, is that the organization is always asking the question, when will I see value from my investments? And I think it's a reasonable question to ask. And so tooling the project management process to be able to answer that question effectively is what Deliver is about. So we are adding Deliver for Jira into our product suite. It'll primarily be a curation tool to leadership using structure as a data platform. So the problem being solved for this first iteration of Deliver, looking at the way structures are in Jira, all structures are currently equal. If you go to the structure menu, there's just a list of structures. If you go to search for structures, they're all equal. So if someone has created a structure to sort of manage their own initiatives, it's at the same level as maybe a structure that's managing a portfolio level product. And over time, this can get busy. There really wasn't any portfolio level decision support and metrics in structure. Structure certainly has a lot of metrics and a lot of tools, but I didn't see the kinds of decision support that I was looking for the kinds of meetings I was in reporting up to leadership. And I saw that there was a bridge needed between long-range planning and Agile JIT execution. And so this is what the 1.0 release of Deliver is targeting. So Deliver addresses these problems, first of all, by separating out the portfolio level structures that are date driven. So we're going to create a separate way to manage those. Provide workflow for the structures. So the structures themselves will now be able to flow through a workflow, and the goal of this workflow is to prioritize structures in a backlog, move them into a planning stage where you are assessing capacity needs and budget needs, move them into an execution phase where you're trying to burn all the scope that is contained in that structure down to zero. And then when that happens, you can ship the product that that structure is describing. And then it moves into a done state and becomes part of a historical analysis pool. We're including some portfolio level planning tools to assist with that. We're providing some status and decision support tools at the portfolio level. And a big part of this is to be engineering process agnostic. Certainly Agile has a lot of mindset in the engineering space, but organizations are generally doing some sort of augmented Agile, some sort of pseudo Agile. They apply some of the principles, and then there's just a lot of processes that they bring to the table themselves. And so it's sort of a pseudo Agile that most organizations are using. So if you're using strict Agile, pseudo Agile, Kanban, even waterfall, we don't care what process you're using. The other guiding philosophy is that Deliver is simple. We just want to focus on the kinds of things that will help you get through a weekly status meeting that will provide good data on all of the projects across the portfolio and get some decisions made that you can measure and bring back to the next meeting. We're going to rely heavily on simulation and prediction to drive decisions. So there's a wealth of historical data in Jira. We want to mine that to make some predictions into the future and possible futures, and then drive decisions based on that data. And all the tools and metrics in Deliver will work together around dates. So dates are central to Deliver. And this was sort of a bitter pill I had to swallow, is that dates matter, and that the more effectively we can tool to the dates, the less anxiety is generated in the organization around coming up with dates. So I'm going to transition now just into some of the screenshots of Deliver as it is currently in development. So here's the Deliver dashboard. And there are a couple things I'll call out here. Way over to the left, the number 1 shows the Deliver workflow for this particular installation. There's a backlog, a planning phase, an in development phase, and a done phase. So there might be a long list of things in the backlog with very little information on what scope and what definition is for that project. In the planning stage, that gets refined and capacity gets allocated. In development, you're trying to burn down the scope in that delivery to 0 and then move it to done. In the middle, with the number 2, we've got the list of deliveries that are currently in development for this instance. They're in priority order. They have basic status light reporting. So green means all systems go, yellow means there's some risk accruing, and red means that there's some risk we absolutely need to address. If we look over at 3, there's a target date, which we negotiated with the teams and with leadership, and we set for this delivery. And then there's a date that Deliver's algorithms are predicting the project is trending to. There are a few other items that I'm going to skip over for now. So creating a delivery is very easy. You simply give it a name. And what I've found when creating deliveries in an organization, it's best to use the language that leadership uses itself. And that'll generally be 2 words, like launch New York or widget 2.0 or launch website or something along those lines. And that way, the language that leadership is using to talk about these large projects maps directly into the tool you're using to curate the status of those projects. So you just name it, give it a target date, and when you're adding it, you can just give it a hopeful target date, and that target date can change as you start engaging in the planning process and negotiating with the teams and leadership. You can move that around until you want to lock something in. And then you tell it what structure is going to be the canonical structure to hold the scope for this project. So I just want to talk also a little bit about how we conceptualize what a delivery is. So, and I put this chart together working with organizations because I saw them thinking in terms that were not correct. So I put not a delivery in places where I felt I needed to really highlight that that's not the place to talk about these large scale portfolio level projects. So if we look at this chart, we see at the bottom, we've got team 1, team 2, and team 3 and their backlogs. And a delivery is not an item like an epic in a team's backlog. And it's not some large goal the team is trying to create either on top of the backlog. What a delivery is its alignment cross-functionally across all these teams towards a goal the organization is trying to get done. And the structure associated with that delivery will hold all of the cross-functional work necessary to get that project done. A delivery has a hierarchy. So the delivery is the top of the hierarchy, and underneath that are the epic level descriptions of the kinds of work these teams will need to do in order to deliver the project. And then underneath those epics are the stories that describe the specific things engineers will need to do to deliver on those epics. And this is flexible. This is the simplest hierarchy that Deliver supports, but if you use SAFe, you can also plug the SAFe model in, and Deliver will work with that. You don't need to use epics. If you use something else, you can plug that in as well. So there's some configurability here, but Deliver does require a hierarchy in order for its algorithms to be able to get a sense of scope before you fully define the story level scope. And this lines up, this hierarchy lines up with the planning levels that I showed earlier, where leadership's thinking in quarters, so they map to delivery. Management's thinking in terms of weeks, they generally map to epics, and staff is thinking in terms of days, and they generally map to stories. So from the Deliver console, for every delivery, you can get to the structure that is the canonical data source for that delivery. And you can also get to what we call a predictive cumulative flow diagram. And I'll talk more about that later, but the predictive cumulative flow diagram is the primary mechanism for planning and status around dates. The other concept we're adding is teams. So in Deliver, a team is a backlog of work that a group of people are organized around. And Deliver doesn't track individual people. It doesn't track the population of a team. What it tracks are the metrics around the backlog that has been identified. So a team with 5 people will have a certain metrics profile. Another team with a different mix of people will have a different metrics profile. What Deliver doesn't try to do is go down and understand each individual in that team, or try to predict what'll happen if you put 2 more people on a team or split a team. There's just so many factors involved there. There's not a lot of predictability. Sometimes if you reduce a team in size, you'll actually get more productivity out of it. It's a complicated thing, and I think you have to manage the people at that level, and you generally will have your Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and management available to do that. You can tell Deliver what your expectations are. So if you make some changes to a team, you can augment the algorithm and say, this is what our expectation is. And then you can see if the actual metrics the team is producing are hitting your expectations. So there is that ability. Adding a team, so organizations track their teams in a variety of different ways. Some organizations will just create a project and the team will just use the project in Jira. Other organizations will have a custom field with a list of teams, and you'll select the teams that the scope, that the ticket is to be associated with. I've seen organizations use the component field, potentially even labels. There's just a lot of different ways to do it. And Deliver will provide mechanisms for the most common ones out of the gate, and then we'll add in additional ways to identify teams as we encounter them. But initially for Summit, we're focusing on one team, one project. And then post-Summit, we'll add in custom fields and then some other before we actually launch. So there will be several different ways to define teams. Another thing we're adding in is engineering areas will generally have large screen monitors that sort of radiate out important information to the engineering group. Could be uptime status for servers or other metrics. So we're going to have a UX that's suitable for a large screen monitor that just shows the highest level priorities the organization is working on and some basic status and trending data for those projects. So now I'm going to transition into talk about the predictive cumulative flow diagram that we actually released last year in Structure itself. And this year we've added in some additional features for planning to facilitate planning in the Deliver product. We're going to move this into the Deliver product. So before I dive into that, I just want to get into the underlying data model, the underlying analytics and data model for the predictive cumulative flow diagram. So if we take all the data in Jira, there's a subset of it that's managed in Structure. And what I've found is that generally the most important data in an organization, you'll find it in Structure. And then there's just a lot of other data that we do care about, but it's not related to the most critical projects the organization is working on. So using Structure as a data platform to get at that data, the predictive cumulative flow diagram will break out the work into its basic workflow states, work that's done, work that's in process, and work that still needs to be planned. And from there, we can use those categories of data for a few different purposes. From the data that's been completed, our historical data, we can derive some team metrics. So that's where our predictive metrics are rooted. From the work that's in process, those are the tickets that we want to make decisions on a daily and weekly basis in order to improve outcomes for a project. And the plan data, we want to be able to make capacity allocations against that data, data for the future, whether it's on projects that we're currently doing that the teams are grooming, or projects that we hope to be able to accomplish at some point in the future and we haven't done any work on yet. And so this just shows, delivers application of historical profiles and performance to the immediate decisions that we need to make for in-process projects, and then helping us plan our capacity against longer-term goals. So to sort of bring it all together on one slide, we're using what we know on the left to help fill in the gaps about what we don't know on the right. And if we look at this chart, we see that we've got a section where all the work is done and we have completed projects, we have workflow data for those projects, issue links, a bunch of other forensics in Jira that we can use to figure out how the organization engages with work. And this includes how teams individually break down stories, how they perform against burning down their backlogs and so forth. We can see that from the work in process state all the way into the future, our issue backlog gets thinner as time goes forward. We don't know as much about the far future as we know about the present. And what algorithms in Deliver will help do is fill in the gaps about what we don't know. So if we have a project that's only thinly scoped, Deliver's algorithms will fill that out with simulated scope that is based on how those teams have engaged with projects in the past. So using that methodology, the predictive CFD can fill out a project, a multi-team project, and give you some sense of how that project might complete in the future, given how the teams have worked in the past. So I'm gonna walk through this. I'm not gonna get into what a cumulative flow diagram is. I could do a whole presentation on that, but just very briefly, if we look at the one in the bottom left, we'll see the two axes. The x-axis is time. So as we can see the dates on the bottom moving to the right. So as we move to the right, time goes forward, and the axis going up is the number of tickets. So 129, 257, 386, and so forth. And you can see the legend says that the blue area represents tickets we need to do, and the green area represents tickets that we've done. And so as time moves on, we get more and more tickets done, and we eventually reach the far top right of the graph where the green line touches the blue line and we have no more work to do. So what this CFD is doing is showing us by team when each team is predicted to run out of backlog for this project. So we can see the core team, the billing team, the Android team are predicted to finish before the target date that we've set. You can see the line up there at 3. It's showing us the target date that we've set for this particular delivery. And iOS and web are predicted to finish slightly over that date. The dotted lines emanating from the team pins are telling us what the algorithm is detecting in terms of variance in their process. So we can see Android is pretty much plus or minus a week on the estimated completion date, and core, way over on the left, has a pretty tight within a few days estimation for completion. So this gives us a sense of the amount of variance in the team's process and the error margin for the target date that the algorithm is predicting. If we move over to 4, there's a table that just gives some basic metrics for each of the teams. We can see that, for example, the web team is generally getting about 18 tickets done per week. It tells us how many tickets they are remaining for the project, which is 216, and how many of those tickets, how many the algorithm is predicting. So it's also 216 because this is a 100% simulated project. There are no stories that have been created for this project. I ran it against a structure that only had epic level definition for each of these teams. And way over to the right, we can see the predicted target date that the algorithm has given us, and it's the 2 top teams are in red because they're over the line, the target date line that we've set. If we look down at 5, we can see that billing has an additional menu area expanded. This is where we interview the teams to have them come up with the kinds of work they'll need to do in order to get this project done, and make some estimates as to the throughput they think they're going to achieve for this project. So one of the things here you can see under billing, there's epics plus or minus. We can tell Deliver to simulate epics for a project without actually having them in Jira. And what it'll do, if the team talking with the billing team, they say, we're going to probably need to do about 4 different large things to get this project done. So we'll create about 4 epics for this project. you can plug that in and it'll put a +4 next to the epic. If you look over under the predicted column, you'll see an epic icon with a +4. That tells us that our plan expects to see at some point an additional 4 epics from the billing team as this project progresses. They might also tell us that their historical throughput, they've made some changes to the team, maybe added some people or whatever, but they can also augment that. They might be doing production support and want to take a hit on their throughput to account for it and let the algorithm figure out what their date is predicted to be based on that. So in the deliver console, there will be a delivery marker, and then for each delivery marker, there's a structure for that delivery, which will contain the data, and that's primarily where you're going to do your analysis. And there will be a predictive CFD associated with that delivery, which is where you'll get your synthesis for basically curated reporting up to leadership around dates. And it'll also give you some information about how the teams are trending and which teams are the long pull on the project, which teams maybe have encountered some blockers because you've got a cumulative flow diagram available, and it'll give you that data. So now I'm going to transition into a live demonstration of the predictive cumulative flow diagram. So I'll pull that up. And the question we're gonna be focused on answering is the one I mentioned at the beginning, which I think is what every business is pretty much asking in these large status meetings: is when will I get value for my investment? Let me switch over to all right, so here we have the Gadget live in Jira. I have it set up to work with a structure that I've called Launch New York City, which is right here. So this is just a very thin structure. We've just created this project. We want to get our product into New York City. Maybe it's mobile scooters or something along those lines. And I have based we've launched the product in LA, so we have a completed structure with just a ton of data about how these teams perform. And we're going to let the Gadget use that data to model the teams from a metric standpoint. So as a project planner, I'm going to go talk to these teams, and I generally find that I can interview these teams in about an hour plus or minus, really. Sometimes it's 45 minutes, sometimes it'll be an hour and a half, but these meetings are generally fairly short. And I can go, say, talk to the core team and get them in a room with their product owner and have them talk about the work that'll be involved, and they'll kind of categorize it out and section it out, and they'll say, you know, we think we're gonna have to do maybe 7 major things to get this project out. So we can plug that in and save it off. And I forgot to mention to actually look at the core pin, but the core pin went from way on the left to way to the right now, because the Gadget is now simulating an additional 7 epics for that team. I can go talk to billing and get their assessment, and they might say, hey, you know, basically we think we're going to need about 4 epics to get this done. And additionally, we're doing production support for LA, so we want to take a 25% hit on our throughput. So it's fine. Plug that in. Same thing, go in, talk with iOS. You know, they say, hey, we think we can get it done. It's going to take about 4 epics, so on and so on. So here we have the graph starting to fill out and show us what we're predicted to achieve given how these teams have performed in the past, how they've broken down work. It's giving us predictions on the amount of scope that's going to be generated to get this done by team. So it looks like we're looking at a project about between 400 and 500 stories to hit our date, we'll need about 50 stories a week done across all the teams. And we can look over here and see our target date is going to be missed by billing and iOS. And so we know very early that maybe we've got a problem with scope, with throughput, with other priorities for these teams that we need to talk about right now in order to get this more aligned. So you can go talk to leadership and say, hey, is it okay if we delay this project 3 weeks? Or is there something we can do to reprioritize the work coming into iOS so that they don't have to do as much other work and they can focus on this? That negotiation can happen really early. But let's say management is okay with moving the date out 2 weeks, but not 3. So we'll go, okay, we'll take it, plug that in. Now we only need to, over the course of this project, we only need to really keep track, focus on iOS and billing and pull them in really 1 week, which through the course of a project, there are a lot of decisions that can be made to sort of to close that gap. But this is where your focus is going to need to be, and you already know that out of the gate. So this is the planning mode for this gadget. This is where you can go in and make these adjustments to the algorithm and lock something in. When you switch to execution of this project, you can switch the gadget to what's called status mode, and that'll change slightly the presentation. So if we look at billing in iOS, when I switch this to status mode, there's going to be a little bit of a change there. And billing drops way back here because they took a 25% hit on their throughput. But now that we're in status mode, it's only going to look at the actuals that that team is producing. So if it sees the hit or not is based on what they actually end up doing. If they had said, hey, we think we're going to do 50% better than before, they don't get that credit until they actually produce it in status mode. When you go back to planning mode, you can see what your assumptions were, but in status mode, it's going to work against the actuals that that team produces. So now we're in status mode and the teams are off doing their agile process and grooming stories and creating epics and so forth. So this tool can also help us keep track of how they're working against the assumptions that we set. So I'm going to show that now. Let's go to the iOS team and the structure. First, I just want to show that there's a pop-up for the iOS team on the graph, and it tells us that our plan epics are +4. So we're expecting to see 4 additional epics from this team. And the planned stories are +55. So we're expecting to see about 55 stories from this team as well. So we'll go over to the structure. Just add a new epic for iOS. So maybe they go into their grooming and they create an epic with their product owner, and you weren't in the meeting. But if we go back to our gadget and we look and we see iOS is +4 and we refresh this page, it deducts the actual epic that was created from our planned epics. And you'll notice the story count stays the same because the algorithm is just transitioning from planned to actuals. And if they start creating more epics than planned, you'll start getting negative numbers here, which means that according to the plan, we would need to reduce some scope. And this will also work for stories. So as they start grooming those epics and into stories, it'll start deducting those actual story counts from the planned story counts. And you'll be able to monitor this over time as the project progresses and see if we're generating too much scope, if maybe there's a delay that we want to focus on and generate more scope in order to hit our target. So I'm going to switch back to the presentation. And just wrap up. So Deliver for Jira is a portfolio level product from ALM Works. We'll be demoing it at our booth at the Atlassian Summit. So come by, I'll be there, and we'll have a developer version of it with a lot of the features that I've presented here available. After Summit, we're going to transition into an early access program for the product, and then we're looking to have it available in the marketplace by summer 2020. And now I guess we'll switch to the Q&A.
Yes. Thank you, Jeremy, for the presentation. We have a number of questions that have come in for you. The first question will be, will Deliver be available for Jira Data Center instances?
Jira Data Center, yes. The area that will require porting is cloud. So server and data center, yes.
Next question, how does the predictive algorithm handle releases that have items that are not continuously closed but follow a more waterfall process? Example, closing out stories at the end of a quarterly or semi-annual release.
Right, so what you can do is tell Deliver, you would probably want to move what Deliver considers done up your workflow chain. So if you have a state where engineers believe they're done, quality thinks they're done, the product owner thinks they're done, if you have a workflow state to track that, you can tell Deliver to use that workflow state. It doesn't need to be done, let's say. You can use any state in your workflow as the finished state in the Deliver product. I hope that answers your question.
This CFD looks like a series of steps. Would this predictive model follow the step function or try to smooth the predictive line?
It doesn't try to smooth the predicted line because it's actually it's a simulated team that's generating simulated data. So once I showed you only the 100% predicted chart, but as you are working on these projects and you're executing on these projects, you're going to see a lot of actuals produced. So as time goes forward, you're going to have some historical data that's going to match up nicely with the projected data. And you'll notice on these cumulative flow diagrams that they are jagged because it just shows how these teams are interacting with work and the work's flowing through these workflow states. And one of the things I like about this chart is that it's a great visual check on whether or not you are going to believe the data. And if the data looks like a nice transition from history to the future, I'm more likely to trust it than if there's a big bend or a break in the transition. And then I would go in and start wondering about the data, and then I'd wonder about the teams and the project and so forth. So it's all a bunch of signals, but smoothing it, I don't think I don't think it'd help with the believability. I'm not sure I'm answering your question directly, but there's a reason that the lines are jagged, and it's because it's actually simulating these teams and it's simulating the work that they're doing, and that's how these graphs look.
Okay. Can Tableau connect to Deliver to enable reports from Deliver's data source in addition to other data sources? An example would be finance systems.
Right. There is a key feature that we're putting into Deliver that I didn't talk about at all, which is what we're calling the Cortex API. And so we are thinking in terms of integration with this product and making the predictive data available, making the basic data available for these teams and projects, giving a nice, consistent, well-documented API to the organization using this product so that other systems, whether it's development's internal tools and build system or another product that would like to get access to the data for its own purposes, whether it's budgeting or planning or whatever. So we are focused on open, exposed APIs. I don't know about any specific integration at this point, though, so I don't know how Tableau would make use of that.
Okay. Does Deliver have a breakout view that highlights how new bugs are impacting delivery dates?
That is an awesome question, because the graph that I had, and one of the features on the list is to break out bugs on that graph. And the graph that I had engineered before I came to ALM Works showed bugs separate from other kinds of work on that graph, and you could see sort of a spark line of bugs start to develop as the project switched to more of a quality focus. And you could see when that was getting wide and when it was narrow, and it was very helpful. So that isn't in the chart now, but it's absolutely going to be in the chart, a quality focus and some visuals for the quality of the project.
When the product is released, do you have an idea how much Deliver will cost?
We don't have a pricing model for it yet. Deliver is a product that likely requires some process integration in order to be effective. And so reaching out through our partners is probably going to be the first foray that we make into the marketplace. And I don't have pricing data yet is basically the answer. And it's likely to be a little bit more involved than the products that we currently have.
Okay. Does Deliver require any changes to how we manage our projects currently?
It could. So for example, I showed the hierarchy where there's epics and stories. If you're not using epics, you're gonna really limit the algorithm's ability to make predictions early in the development, early in the planning cycle. There are definitely some data requirements, and that's part of the reason there's maybe some consulting and integration work necessary to really get this up and running.
And a question I could answer: how can I get into the early access program? So in the email we send after the webinar with the webinar recording, we will provide a link that you can click on, and you can email us at deliver@almworks.com, and you can tell us you're interested in joining, and we will put you on the list. We do plan on sending an email campaign to people who might be potentially interested in joining as well. But as an attendee of this webinar, we are offering out to everyone who attended and people who did not attend today. First, you'll have the first chance to actually join before everyone else does. So that's all the questions. Actually, we have one more question. Can every project have a different definition of done, or does that get set for all projects?
That's a good question. And really, so what Deliver makes use of is there's maybe a little known feature in Jira where they have workflow state categories, which are above all of the workflow states that individual projects use. And you can define these categories, but Jira ships with basically to do, in process, and done. And when you add a workflow step to a project, you do go through a step where you tell Jira, is this an in-process state or a done state? And that's actually what Deliver is looking at right now. So whatever a project considers done, a done state, Deliver will make use of that. Whatever a project thinks is a to-do state, Deliver will make use of that. We will absolutely need to get more refined in that, because workflows in organizations is probably the highest level of diversity in the Jira ecosystem. So, but right now we focused on the workflow categories. So we're looking at what the project considers done, and it doesn't matter what the specific workflow state is. So if I understand your question correctly, it will work in most cases unless you've got some corner case, really.
Okay, and that's all the questions that we have for today. Next steps is view and share the video archive of today's webinar. That will be available in our webinar link, alm.works/YouTube. We will also have it on our YouTube channel, so don't forget to follow ALM Works on YouTube, and you'll have access to all of our videos. If you're interested in learning more about structure, please visit alm.works/structure. And if you have any additional questions or comments about today's webinar, please email us at webinars@almworks.com. And like I said earlier, if you're interested in joining in the early access program, please feel free to email us through the mail to link that we provide in the email later this week or early next week. So for that, thank you for attending today's webinar, and we hope you join us next time. Thank you, everyone.